whenever you guys are ready, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Go ahead. Stay around the circle. You want this one or you?
Yes, appreciate it.
English, you said?
Oh, yes.
Can we get one?
Okay. No, you're good, man. Thank you.
You get so many benefits. Nice, man.
You comfortable with this one? Or do you want this one? This good. Yeah, if you don't mind.
And they have shadow opportunities. Everybody doesn't listen to.
Think so.
He doesn't listen to.
I'm gonna force him. I'm gonna force him to.
No, no, ACM and GDC.
Yeah.
GDC is only must be friends.
It's just gonna be a 10-minute session with the Quran's.
And they do a much.
Inshallah, he'll give us some beneficial information. And yep.
All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. So pardon me for standing up. I prefer to lecture with a board, and I find that drawing and writing helps. My focus is going to be on the correct pronunciation of the Arabic letters, which can prove difficult for non-native speakers. It may come as second nature for native speakers, but there are certain letters that even native speakers do need help with and need practice with. We'll start simple. We'll be talking about makharij al-huruf, origination of letters. There are four, I believe four main makharij. One is al-jawf, which is the just the inside of the mouth. The other is the lips, the throat, and the tongue. The mouth is a debated one. Some people believe that it is an origination. The others take those letters and just stick them in the other three, but that's not important. Letters originating from the mouth are going to be your vowels. There are 3 vowels in the Arabic language: alif, waw, and ya. Lips are your frigatives and your I forget the word for them, but your B's and your M's. So you have the letter mim, letter ba, and ba. I believe that's all of them. And wow, although, yes, there's a bit of overlap here. Your throat letters are your hamza, your ain, your ghain, your kha, your ha, and your ha. Yes. And the tongue is the rest. I'm assuming that we all know our Arabic letters. Easy mnemonic device. أبجد هوز حطي كلام سعفص قرشت سخذ ضع
Oh, easy.
Some people are more used to, yes. Oh, that's the older way of doing it. But questions so far? Good so far? All right. So I find that the most challenging letters happen with some of the tongue and some of the throat, because there's a lot of overlap with English, there's a lot of overlap with other languages. The toughest letters I've found would be the, The, ha, and ha versus ha, qa versus ka. So we'll do a little bit of practice here. Everybody say the. The. You're sticking your tongue through your teeth. The. Thal. الذين. الذين. ذا. ذا.
What's the difference here?
Difference between the and the. Notice where your tongue goes. With the, you stick your tongue all the way through your teeth. The, you're stopping short. The same place that you put for sa, except you're adding vocal to it. The throat vibrates with the as opposed to sa. It's a very different place for your tongue than the. Yes? Good so far? I know it's a little silly to kind of go this basic, but there's a lot of people that will say al-lazina. It's just how they pronounce it. But the correct way to do it is al-lazina. You need to keep in mind that this is a the and not a za. The. Tongue through the teeth. A and a. These are both throat letters. A happens earlier in the throat. A is further down. Everybody say a. A. Everybody say a. A. The ain and the ha come from a similar place, but one of them has a baha and the other has a ba'a, they call it. I know they're difficult terms. It comes with practice.
One's more angry than
the other. The is angry. Maybe it's easier if we start with ha and then go to a. All right. It's a hot day. It's a super hot day. You did some yard work. Okay. You come in. You're finally in front of the air conditioning. You grab your favorite non-science supporting beverage, cup of ice. You take that first sip. Everybody say. That place, that's the same place that the a comes from. Ha and a. Everybody say ha. Hamdu. Hamdu. Ha. Abdun. A. Abdun. You guys are doing good. Two more. All right, well, speed run. All right. These are come from a very similar place. Maybe we'll do these at a different time. But qa and ka. These are both tongue letters. You may think that qa comes from the throat, but if you think about where you're putting your tongue, it's coming from the tongue itself. So here is your tongue, bad drawing, and here is the palate. There's the front tooth there. You've got your hard palate and your soft palate. For ka, the tongue hits further in front. As in when you say castle or cat, that's your ka sound. Everybody say ka, cat, castle, Kathy, ka. Now take your tongue further back to your soft palate. Qa, qa, qasim, qafila, qala, qa, ka. Do we notice where we're hitting our tongue? It's a very subtle difference. Yeah, it's a very subtle difference between the two places that you put your tongue. Qa, further back, versus Ka, further in front. Ka, you can actually feel some air coming through. Qa feels like you're almost choking on your tongue, kind of, right? Because it's so far onto the soft palate, it's almost like blocking the airway a little bit. How much time do I have? Very good. No, we'll cover ba and ba next time. Those are a challenge. A lot of Arabic speakers actually have trouble with this one. And ba is actually unique to the Arabic language. It's called لغة الضاد. It's the only language with this letter in it. So we'll focus on that next time. I appreciate your patience with my off the cuff here, but صلى على محمد وعلى
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Okay, inshallah. Thank you very much, Brother Ahmed. That was very good, mashallah. So I think we were doing Maqam al-Hijaz last time, and we were talking, just in brief, for those who didn't attend perhaps last time, we're talking about the different melodies that you can use when you're reciting the Quran, right? And these melodies are very important because if you understand these melodies, you'll be able to understand when many reciters of the Quran, when they recite, why they change their tune patterns, why they go from one tune to the next. So there's a certain art behind what tunes are used to recite the Quran. And these tunes, they're specific Arabic melodies. And so learning these tunes, you will be able to attune your ears to be able to, first off, understand what different reciters of the Quran are doing. But then also the goal is for us to be able to recite like that too, because it's a very beautiful way to recite. And this is very adaptable, not just the Quran, but you can use it in very many other things. For instance, latmiyas, recitations, eulogies, basically for the Ahlul Bayt, right? You can recite adhan in these different tune patterns, right? You can recite du'as in these tune patterns. So it's very, very adaptable. And there's a science behind which emotions each maqam, we call these maqamat in Arabic, right? Or basically tune patterns. Each tune pattern has a specific sense or specific emotion that comes out when you recite in that certain tune pattern. So, it's right now we've talked about the fact that there's actually 8 tune patterns, and we're going to go through each one, inshallah, but we're going to go through slowly so everybody can learn, inshallah. And it's supposed to be interactive. Don't feel shy because we want to practice, right?
We're at different levels as well. So if
Yes.
you get zero level, it's okay. Just try your best.
So I think what we had done last week is we had recited Surah Al-Fatiha, and then one of the small surahs of the Quran, Surah Al-Takathur, in this tune pattern. And we'd had everybody go around and try to copy, right, the tune. So inshallah, I think the way that we'll structure today, we'll do the same thing again with Surah Al-Fatiha. And then I was requested to do adhan in this tune pattern, because that way you can kind of see how the emotion comes out when you're reciting adhan. And then after that, we'll play some recitations of different reciters, so you guys can see what the maqam sounds like from other people's voices too. You get a little bit of exposure that way. But I want you guys to also kind of try to practice as we're doing this, and even at home, you can go back and listen to this. This is put on YouTube, inshallah, or you can even just YouTube Maqam al-Hijaz. We're going through Maqam al-Hijaz right now. So that's the specific maqam that we're going to discuss. If you just Google that, you'll find tons of examples of people reciting this maqam. Just try to copy them, and slowly your voice gets better and better, and then you can copy that sound. So inshallah, I think we'll start with Surah Al-Fatiha in this specific maqam, and then after that we'll transition into the adhan, because you said we have like what, 10 minutes?
Yeah, I'd say 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Okay. Let me just grab my phone here, because I think we might end up playing. I might just skip the reciters then, because you guys can Google these reciters, but I recommend certain reciters that actually recite a very beautiful, easy Maqam al-Hijaz. One is Sheikh Muhammad Siddiq al-Minshawi. He recites a very, if you just Google Minshawi Hijaz, you can find the way he recites Hijaz. Another one who's very good to listen to is, his name is Mishari Rashid, Mishari Rashid al-Afsasi. You guys might have heard of him, Mishari Rashid. He's very famous. You can also listen to him. He also has a very nice Maqam al-Hijaz. If you just Google Maqam Hijaz, you'll find plenty of reciters, but these two recite a very good Maqam Hijaz. So, so I'll start with Surah Al-Fatiha, and I think the way that we had done it last week is everybody had then gone around and recited Surah Al-Fatiha. I think because, yeah, I'm not sure if we have enough time, honestly, if we're kind of limited. So first off, I'll just recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and then the Adhan, and then if you guys want to practice, we'll have some time at the end, hopefully, a couple minutes to practice. What do you think? Does that sound good, Abdullah? Yeah? All right, so...
And I drew what I think would be like what the sound looks like. It goes up, and there's a little dip in the end. That's kind of the way the tone sounds like.
Yeah, so first, I'm going to recite the Basmala and Salawat in this tune pattern, and then we'll recite Surah Al-Fatiha, right? I think we'll start with the Basmala. Maybe if you want with the Basmala, we can go around. I think that would be good. All right, so first we'll do the Salawat, right? So, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, right? So that's the tune. So it's called Hijaz because this tune pattern, you'll find it a lot in Makkah and Medina. People recite this tune pattern in particular. So, Bismillah now, right? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Do you guys want to try? Yeah? Brother Ahmed, do you want to start? Ahsant, all right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Great.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Good.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Good.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Very good.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Good. Great. Ahsant. MashaAllah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Great. Ahsant. Sure. I think ideally we shouldn't have the sisters. Yeah. But yes, but you guys can recite on your own time if you like, inshallah. Brother Sha'ir, do you want to practice too? We missed you.
My turn where we're reading.
We're just saying the basmala in Hijaz. So
Can I hear it from
yes,
you and then I
of
can
course.
give it a try?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Okay, actually you went into bayat, but it was very good. It was very good, mashallah. It was a very beautiful way to recite still. Inshallah, we'll get to maqam bayat at the end. Inshallah, and it's one of. Okay, we can do it next, inshallah.
I feel like it might be the one that we hear the most.
Yes, of course. So okay, so now I'm gonna recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and then we'll transition into the adhan, and then we'll just leave it open if you guys want to practice some more. Okay. So Surah Al-Fatiha, you can recite this maqam in two ways, right? One is very what we call mujawwad, in kind of a slow, very, very, like kind of Abdul Basit style, right? And the other is kind of a fast pace, what we call tartil, right? When you're reciting quickly. So the first is called mujawwad or tahqiq. Tahqiq means you're reciting every letter, you give it every letter its haqq, right? You're very, very exact with your makhraj, exact with your rules, and you take time on each syllable. Whereas for tartil is used like when you're reciting salat, you recite more quickly. You won't take the time to pronounce every single letter the way that perhaps you should, you know. So there's different paces you can go when it comes to Quran recitation. So I'm going to show you basically in the I think we'll do tahqiq because tahqiq really shows the vocal range, inshallah. And then we can do murattal too as an example, right? So if you're going to use maqam hijaz, you should really start in, of course, a lower pitch, and then we can go a little bit higher, you know, as you go in the register, right? So again, starting with Bismillah, right? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Right? So that's Hijaz. And you can see I went in the middle, I went very high, right? So if I'm going to read a faster pace, right? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Right? So that's faster, right? So you guys can see sort of how the maqam sounds, even if you're going at a fast pace, it still has that same tune. Do you notice the tune is the same? When I went slow and when I went fast, it's the same tune, right? Perhaps as you listen to more tunes, it'll become more obvious, but this tune is very classic, right? So now let's just switch to adhan. How many more minutes do we have? 3-4 minutes? Okay. No, that's okay. So, when it comes to adhan has specific maqams that are used, right? And you'll find, pretty much you can find adhan in any maqam, but there's specific maqams that are used most commonly. One is maqam al-rast, and we'll talk about maqam al-rast later. I use maqam al-rast most of the time when I do adhan. Other brothers, they use maqam al-hijaz. Hijaz is very common, you'll find in Medina, in Mecca, they'll use this specific maqam. Then there's other brothers, a lot of the Iranian brothers, they'll use maqam Kurd, which is another style of recitation. And inshallah, we'll go through all of these, but let's just focus on maqam al-hijaz for now. So maqam al-hijaz, the adhan is like this. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Right? أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. And again, I'm going fast, right? But you can slow this down as much as you want. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. So, inshallah, I hope that kind of shows you how the maqam, how the pattern goes, right? Inshallah. Do you guys want to try? Anybody want to try? Yeah?
I thought it was always like you go from low to high,
Yeah.
but then like in the end you were like keeping like the same tone.
Yeah. Oh, with the adhan? So yeah, with the adhan, so because I was going fast paced, you can go really, really high pitched if you want with the adhan, right? You can go Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. Right? So you can go really high if you want. But I'm trying to focus more on the lowest pitch for now because I want you guys to learn the pattern. But eventually you could take it really high if you want, right? But I think learning the bass it's good because that to go in the higher vocal range really requires more practice, you know, and training your voice to go on higher octaves and such. But just starting with the basics, let's focus on just being able to do that first, right? So anybody want to try? Just think maybe Allahu Akbar. I don't know if we have time, but
You want to try it?
yeah.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
So you went into rust. So that's maqam rust, right? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That's rust, right? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That's rust, right? So rust is kind of goes like this, right? Whereas maqam Hijaz is like this. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right?
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
That was close. That was close. You're getting there. So you want to almost rotate your voice a little bit. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
It seems really hard.
It's okay. It's okay. It requires some practice, but that's how you get the hang of it, right? But keep practicing. MashaAllah. That was a good attempt. Anybody else want to try? Just saying maybe Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Anybody else? Any brave souls? Yeah. That was pretty good. Yes, mashallah. That was very good. We gotta work on spinning the voice a little bit, but you got the basic tune down. Yes, mashallah. Ahsant. Very nice. Anybody else want to try? You want to try? All right, perfect. Yes. Yeah, you're doing great. Keep going. Yeah.
Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu la ilaha illallah.
MashaAllah. Very nice. Very nice. MashaAllah. Keep practicing. You're doing great. MashaAllah. Very nice. Anybody else want to try? Brother Muhammad, you want to try?
I'll do after you.
Okay, so I'll show you again how it's done. So again, I'll do it. I'll do all four Allahu Akbar so you can see, right? The first two, standard way to do it done, you do the first two quickly, and then the next two are a little bit longer, right? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Good, mashallah. Very nice, yeah. So inshallah, yeah. I would say it's actually a maqam that I think it is a little bit hard, to be honest with you. It is a little bit of a hard one to get your voice to, because maqam Hijaz, you know, it starts at a higher level. Like they have what, you know, when you have your octave scale. Remember I told you guys another way to practice your voice is just start low and go high. Right? So practicing that. So where Hijaz starts high, you know. So Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So it starts high, right? Whereas Bayat starts very low. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That's Bayat, right? So people recite adhan like that too. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right? So that's a little bit easier. That's why I think if when we transition to bayat, I think it'll be more natural for a lot of us with deeper voices, inshallah. But Hijaz is good because I think Hijaz is a nice way to attract people to keep practicing maqams because it's one that's used a lot in reciting adhan, and it's a very attractive maqam, right? So, mashallah, brother Naeem actually, when he recites adhan, he always uses this maqam, mashallah. Okay, anybody have any other questions, inshallah? All right, guys, inshallah. We'll close it today for over here, but I think homework is to go on YouTube, listen, write just Maqam Hijaz and listen to the reciters and try to just, your favorite reciter, whoever it is, and just try to copy that. The more you imitate, the better your voice will get, inshallah. Please recite a lot of salawat, inshallah.
We're gonna try to be more in the center of things here because some ladies here, so be a little closer because when you chair,
because then the light becomes yeah. Well, the problem stays the same. No, because the light is like above it, and it's just the back. I mean, it's clear. So as long as it's clear. Can you write something? Can you write something under the? Oh yeah, it comes up. That's not very awesome. Yeah.
Inshallah, next we'll have Brother Muhammad Sha'ir, who's going to talk about our series of discourse on Palestine, and today it's going to be what we do with information. Inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Try to tuck it in. Try to tuck it into your.
Yeah, I'll put it back. Okay.
Don't put it totally because you might lose the voice. You might shut off.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Where's my frame?
The forward.
So I can't pass this.
No.
Okay, this is my range of motion, guys. Okay. So no, alhamdulillah. So I would like to begin with a Surah Al-Fatiha for
all the marhumin in Palestine and Lebanon and across the Muslim Ummah. You know, we have people suffering all over the Muslim Ummah, not just in Palestine. We got people dying in Bangladesh. There's people in Burma. So please, a lot salawat and Surah Al-Fatiha. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. And I like to begin with a verse from the Quran, um, at least to center our um, train of thought. This is a few verses from Surah Al-Hujurat. Um, I'm sorry. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقدموا بين يدي الله ورسوله واتقوا الله إن الله سميع عليم. Okay. I'm gonna start over. I just wanted to see how far I'm gonna have to read. Alright, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقدموا بين يدي الله ورسوله واتقوا الله إن الله سميع عليم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تهبطوا أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. إن الذين يغضون أصواتهم عند رسول الله أولئك الذين امتحن الله قلوبهم للتقوى لهم مغفرة وأجر عظيم. إن الذين ينادونك من وراء الحجرات أكثرهم لا يعقلون. ولو أنهم صبروا حتى تخرج إليهم لكان خير لهم والله غفور رحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا أن تصيبوا قوما بجهالة فتصبحوا على ما فعلتم نادمين. صدق الله العظيم. So I bring up these verses specifically for that last verse that I brought up, but this is a beautiful ayah, verses of the Quran, surah in the Quran, where it talks about how you should comport yourself in front of the Prophet. So it's talking about how you shouldn't be yelling into his room, and there's a certain way you should approach the Prophet. Okay, that's the introductory section, and then it kind of shifts where it talks about if you receive information, and it specifically uses the term nabat. You're supposed to, from a certain individual, someone who's a fasiq, you're supposed to tabayyanu. You're supposed to double check. You're supposed to confirm the information that you're receiving, right? And the surah also continues on. It's beautiful, beautiful surah on how to deal with conflict and what to do in certain conflicting situations between mu'mins, between Muslims, and how you're supposed to act. And this surah, I think, also brings up the beautiful verse of إن كنت شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. It's in the same surah. وشعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. That's in the same surah. So this sort of is very powerful in terms of how it talks about interactions, not just between us and the Prophet, but also interactions amongst groups of people and how that should happen. And I bring it up in the context of Palestine because we are constantly bombarded with different pieces of information. We have news feeds we have Facebook feeds, we have Instagram feeds, we have things we hear on the streets. We're completely bombarded. WhatsApp, Telegram, you get these long messages from your aunt and the uncle talking about God knows what. And so when we're faced with all this information, I think it's very important to be conscious and use some of the critical thinking skills that we've been developing throughout these weekly Fridays to develop an ability to, critically think about the information that you're getting from different avenues, right? Um, because we are constantly bombarded with propaganda and influence campaigns. Anybody who's studied a psychology class knows that even um, you know companies are trying to influence how you purchase. Like the information that you're getting directly influences some of the actions that we do. So it's very important to confirm and verify the information that you're getting. Um, but it also takes me to another context in the Palestine issue. So in the context of Palestine, I wanted to bring it up in the context of first verifying the information that you're getting, make sure that you double check, triple check, making sure that um, we're not falling for or acting in ways that are contrary to a reasonable person, right? That's something that's very important. Um, the other aspect of information that I wanted to bring up in regards to the Palestine issue is information gathering that uh, people and communities living in the United States have had to deal with, and especially in Palestine. So, if we look at the history of civil rights leaders, we look at the history of minority communities being targeted for surveillance and information gathering because they automatically assume that these immigrant communities are hostile. They, there's, I'm sure people have heard very famous story of a guy at a masjid who was planted by I believe the FBI, and he was like encouraging people to do acts, right? And he was a plant. And the thing is that this isn't something that happens just once off. We just hear it about it once off. And when it comes to this idea of information gathering and surveillance of communities, I think, again, taking a step back and trying to think about it critically, why does this happen? What's going on, right? Well, you're gonna, one of the conservative or one of the knee-jerk reactions, it's like, of course, a country needs to know and needs to gather this information because it is important, right? Well, I think that is a valid point, right? And that is something that is important. We all want to be safe, right? We are willing to do a lot for the sake of safety and comfort. Uh, but the nefarious part is how it's done and the type of influence it has on communities. Um, so it's something we have to deal with. And again, there's supposed to be this very fine balance between what is legal, what is ethical, and what you should do, right, in these situations. When it comes to, oh, the government's just gathering information. Well, okay, it might be harmless, but you're pushing a fine line further and further that is degrading certain rights and privileges that individuals and communities have. And the reason we have these rights is that we are in America, and these rights are enshrined in the Constitution, and uh, they are things worth upholding because these values that um, sometimes we forget about being Americans, is that maybe it's not instilled enough is enough, but those first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is by far one of the greatest accomplishments of Western civilization in thousands of years, right? This idea of the right to assemble, this right to free speech, the right to assemble, free speech, bear arms, all these rights that are extremely integral to what it means to be American, right? So we are Muslim Americans, we are immigrants or the children of immigrants, but these American values are very important to us. And so the balancing act is making sure these values are not infringed upon when the state needs to do its responsibility of protecting its citizens, right? And in the context of Palestine, in the context of being immigrants in the United States, I would like to say that, and here is that information is extremely, extremely important, right? Information uh, is, recently I was working on a case, actually, an immigration case, talking about the new oil is data, it's information, where the source of of energy and wealth and concentration is in information. And so um, I want us to make sure that we value information and value the process of going through information, critically thinking, being reasonable, and making sure those are always and constantly a part of our lives as we think about these things and go through our lives. All right. Thank you very much. Please allow salawat. Oh, you got. Oh, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Yeah, questions, concerns. Yeah.
Even Islamically,
Hmm.
that same surah, وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Talks
Yeah.
about spying.
Yeah.
It's quite curious actually that in a Muslim state, wants security, but also Allah says don't spy.
Yeah, yeah. Tajassusu, yeah, and in that act of spreading information in a very secretive way is what is being mentioned there, right?
Even fun, even like they have suspicion that
Yeah.
somebody actually is something that's like
In the ba'd dhanni ithm.
let's
So
say
you have to have certainty, right?
you can't be like basing things
And these are legal requirements, right? Which is very important. So, right? So, if you approach it as a Muslim, these are Sharia requirements and a legal requirements, fiqh requirements, and and that's very similar to what are some of the requirements in U.S. law, right? Because you know, what is Western law based on? We talked about this. It's based off of Judeo-Christian Islamic values.
But then what about doubts?
Doubt, what about it?
Like having doubts.
Yeah, done. Yeah, done. Doubt in some. What? It depends on what kind of doubt. What do you mean by doubt? Doubt that he can slam dunk?
You don't know who they are, but their actions make you concerned. Like, oh, what if they have this intention?
Yeah, you can never look in someone's heart. Like, you never know what's inside someone's heart 100%. Uh,
Sometimes don't face people. Face them.
yeah, that's actually a very important thing, is like maybe voicing that concern. Um, Voicing that concern, and it kind of, that interaction with that individual probably fixes it. Any other questions, concerns?
I have a question that's not topic.
Yeah, it's fine. For me, or you want someone else? Or...
What obligation do we have that we need to mention Imam Ali's name in Azan?
There is. It's not wajib. I'm not a legal scholar or jurisprudent in Islamic law. I am, I guess, an attorney in U.S. law. Um, but in regards to this question, from what I understand, no. So maybe on my free time, but from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it is not a wajib part of adhan, and adhan allows for gaps, and you can make gaps and include different things in it. But please correct me if I'm wrong, brother.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a good question. So the way that it's approached is that first off, if you consider it part of the adhan, your adhan is batil.
Oh, there you go.
Adhan is completely batil.
If it's considered wajib part of the adhan.
If you consider Ashhadu anna Aliyan waliyullah as part of the adhan, that you're saying it with the intention that, oh, this is part of the adhan, your adhan becomes batil.
How can you not have the intention while saying it?
So you're saying it, but you're saying it without, it's with an intention of
That it's not wajib.
completing your iman, but it's not. You cannot say it. It's sort of like you know how we recite Surah Al-Fatiha in Salat, and after reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, you'll say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, right? Or after you recite Surah Ikhlas, you'll say كذلك الله ربنا, right? You'll say that, or in the last sajda, you'll say like a dua like Ya Latif, Irham Abdaka Al-Da'if, or whatever, Ya Wali Al-Afiyah, right? You'll say those things. But that's technically not part of the dhikr.
It's not a rukn.
It's not part of the dhikr. Even saying, you know, if you recited Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen after reciting Surah Al-Fatiha with the intention that Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen is an ayah, your whole salat becomes batil, right? So you can say it, but you don't say it with the intention that it's actually part of the qira'ah, part of the surah, right? So same thing when you say Ashhadu anna Ali waliyullah, you're saying it, but now with that intention that it is part of the adhan, right? You're saying it with the intention of almost completing the adhan in spirit, because your iman is completed by the wilayah of Imam Ali, right? So, and we have riwayat that say this, but of course the actual sigha or the actual form of the adhan does not include that, right? It doesn't include Ashhadu anna Ali waliyullah, but many people will add it, and it's allowed to add it. In fact, it's some scholars have said because of what they call sha'ariyah, that it's kind of a sha'ar of the Shia, that you know it's a slogan of the Shia that Ashhadu anna Ali waliyullah, including that within the adhan is highly mustahab, it's highly recommended. And we have hadith that mention that after you say, you know, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, you should say Ashhadu anna Ali waliyullah. That this is specifically something you should do. You should always mention Imam Ali's wilayah after mentioning the Prophet, right? So that, I hope that answers kind of your question. Yes, of course, yeah, of course. You know, one comment, if you don't mind, brother Shah. So this surah that you brought up, I think it's very important to note also that this surah gives you. So there's two types of statements in Arabic, right? One is called khabar and the other is insha, right? So khabar is that which can be true or false, right? So for instance, you know, you say, you know, the president of the United States, you know, is Biden, for instance, right? That could be a true statement or a false statement, right? But then you have statements that are not technically true or false statements, right? Like for instance, I give you an example. Like you could say, you know, let me see. What would be a great example of insha? It would be like, you know,
Tomorrow it's raining.
For instance, all praise is due to Allah, right?
Okay.
Or let's say, may you be blessed. If somebody says, may you be blessed, you can't say false. You know, that's
Yeah.
not really because may you be blessed is just a statement. It's like almost like a dua. It's a type of supplication for that person. May you be blessed, right?
You're not asserting anything.
You're not asserting anything, right?
Okay.
It's there's what we call khabar, which is an assertion, right? And then insha, which is kind of just a statement of opinion, right? Or a statement of maybe not opinion, but a statement of feeling, or a statement of it's like sort of I guess what we would call it, like it's more prescriptive rather than descriptive. So descriptive speech is khabar,
Okay.
and prescriptive
Yeah,
is more
prescriptive.
insha, right?
Okay.
So, but this surah is beautiful because it tells you both. It tells you about how to deal with both. It tells you about if a fasiq comes,
Yes,
right,
fasiq of
with
naba'in.
naba, then you know, do
Tabayyan.
tabayyun, right?
Yes.
Like verify it. And then the very next verse it tells you about how to understand prescriptively, right? It says وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَيُطِيعُكُمْ فِي كَثِيرٍ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ لَعَنِتُّمْ. It tells you that know that the messenger of Allah is amidst you. If you were to follow what you want, if he were to obey you, it would result in a lot of difficulty, a lot of hardship, right? وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانَ. But Allah made iman something that is beloved to you, right? وَكَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفُسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانَ. So Allah has taken all these things, kufr, fusuq, isyan, this disbelief, you know, basically debauchery, right? Disobedience. Allah has taken these things away from your heart. He's made it despicable to you, right? So it's like telling you how you should look at both. Your khabar and your insha. Your khabar, your assertions should be based on fact, right?
Fact.
On they should be
Tabayyan.
grounded in
Yeah.
reality. but then also
Do
your
research.
prescriptions or your knowledge that is not necessarily an assertion, but rather just a you can say almost an opinion or more like a feeling that you're projecting. That should also be based in the Holy Prophet. It should be based
Mm.
in Iman, right? So it's like a beautiful. That's why the surah is so beautiful because it kind of encapsulates everything, you know?
Very nice. So it's tradition.
Yeah.
So if we're putting in those four categories of information or and for epistemology for types of knowledge, the proscriptive would be maybe like the traditional information, or um, what was the other? So maybe experience and um, would be the more descriptive,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
where
So
it's information that needs to be double checked, something from experience, or even if it's mystical experiences, um, those would have to be double checked. And what is a good understanding of tibyan, like tabayyan, or what is?
tabayyun comes from it comes from the word bana. Bana yabinu, right? Tabayyun is kind of comes from that form, right? So uh, bana means to be clear, right?
Okay,
Bayan
bayan,
means
it's
same thing,
clear.
right? So tabayyan means like seek out to make it
Clarify it.
clear, seek
Yeah,
out to clarify it, to
yeah.
discern it, right?
Fair.
So so to elucidate, I
Yes,
think probably one
yes.
of the best
Oh,
ways we can
that's
translate
great.
it.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's very interesting with the very technical Arabic words to really see what Allah's trying to express.
Yeah.
Thank you for providing us with that
Of course,
definition.
yeah. You know, tabayyun comes from the form 5, right? So they have tafa'ala. Tafa'ala is of this form, tabayyana, right?
تمام،
So
تفاعل.
bayyana, like Allah says, قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ
رشد
الْغَيِّ,
right.
right? So tabayyun means shiddatul bayan. It means like it's so clear, like it's like absolutely like
It-
crystal, you know?
Is that what the ta comes in,
Yeah,
where
that's where the ta
the
comes in.
letter
That tafa'ala,
تأكيد or
it's called a takalluf in Arabic.
تكلف? Okay.
Takalluf means like it can mean like kind of artificial, but it also means like intense,
Mm.
intensity. It portrays this sense of intensity. So that's what tabayyun kind of means.
I believe Brother Shakil, are you going to be presenting now?
You know?
All right, so please allow salawat as he comes up to present. And am I moving this? Okay.
You eventually use the
Appreciate you, man. Okay, gotcha. Sure. I might. Okay. Appreciate you, man. All right. Welcome, everybody. So my topic of discussion today is Quran through a literary lens. So what does that mean? So uh, from what little research I did, I could do more, is what I'm saying. But from what the time allotted I had, there are three ways in which the Quran can be explored, or three of to my knowledge. So through the text itself, in this case, the literary lens, through the context, so the Medina and Meccan culture, and kind of contextually the environment, what is contributing to, language at that time, and an understanding and interpretation of the Quran. And then third, I believe the human experience or mysticism, or kind of what is felt or understood through that type of overall personal lens that differs person to person. But what I'll be talking about is the textual lens, as the Quran as a text, Quran as explored through the lens of language. So, the surah that I was requested to discuss is Surah Al-Takatur, the competition, and that is the 100 Surah 102.
I'm using the translation by Dr. Mustafa Khattab, Clear Quran. I'm sure there's a better translation out there, but that's the one I'm using. I don't know. But so to speak, I'll read through the translation and then kind of get into it that way. So it's 8 lines or 8 ayahs, very brief. So competition for more gains diverts you from Allah until you end up in your graves. But no, you will soon come to know. Again, no, you will soon come to know. Indeed, if you were to know your fate with certainty, you would have acted differently. But you will surely see the hellfire. Again, you will surely see it with the eye of certainty. Then, on that day, you will definitely be questioned about your worldly pleasures. So, before I get into what I would say is the crux or the meat of the theory, the kind of central point of the surah itself, I want to kind of get into the word origin, etymological origins or analysis of certain words, or the actual title of the surah itself. So, to do taqatur, it can have, well, it has basically, from what I understand, one central meaning, and then these other meanings are kind of extrapolated or kind of diverted from that point. So, and this might not be the root word that, would translate to the meanings I'm going to get into, but roughly they are competition and rivalry, or to rival. And then if we go through, and again, this might, I don't know where in the Arabic, the linguistic, the history of linguistics, when Arabic and Latin kind of fuse together or diverge, I don't really know the points on that, but from what I understand, rival is coming from Latin rivalis, originally in the sense person using the same stream as another, from rivus, stream. So, language more so, in this way I'm constructing a breakdown of words in order to construct a kind of network of ideas or a network of images that can kind of help us see a bigger picture. And then competition, early 17th century, from late Wan, blah, blah, not the point, but means to strive for. So if you strive for something, kind of do what you need to do or desire to do in order to obtain that. And then if we kind of make some little lines, strive is connected to Middle English, which is connected to Middle English, which is a shortening of Old French estriver, related to estrif. And can anyone guess what that might mean? Strive, and then strive, estriver, striffer. There's one letter difference. Strife, yes. Nice. So strive and then strife. To strive for something brings about strife in that kind of way. Again, this is my own personal kind of analysis of it. It's not really textual or not really concrete, so to speak, but then strife, anger or bitter disagreement over fundamental issues, conflict, or discord, which brings us back to the root cause of competition. So competition, we strive for things, we undergo strife through it, but interestingly enough, this rivalry derives from the same singular stream of oneness, of abundance, of being given provisions, being provided for. It's all originating from the single stream of God. So it's, I don't know if you want to place irony in that kind of way of looking at it, but there's something to be thought of in that way. How much time do I have?
Yeah, 5 more minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. Cool.
Only because we started late. It's not because that's really...
Okay. Okay, true. No, you're good. Thank you. So that's kind of an introduction onto like the surah itself. When we talk about literary devices or literary tools or literary, what's the other word they use? Techniques. They're just special words we give in order to kind of just say what it is. So this is kind of the origin of words, or rather in this case, word choice. The choice of words is the author, the writer, being Allah, chose to use certain words for a certain reason, for a certain uh, experience to be come across, to be delivered. And so that leads me to this point, which was most interesting to me when I came across it, but the ring theory of composition, which is this idea postulated by, and it's probably been thought of before by many other people, way long before this individual, but Mary Douglas, 2007, in her paper Thinking in Circles, an essay on ring composition. Ring theory of composition goes where, and it might not be to an exact T all the time, but the Quran is kind of, it's composed in a way where it's a mirror image of, the center is the mirror image that draws a line in the sand for symmetry to occur in terms. It could be thematic symmetry, it could be linguistic symmetry, it could be juxtaposition, it could be a complete contrast to what is being discussed. So in this, maybe we'll start with an odd number. We have we have 8 ayahs in this specific surah, but just to kind of deliver the idea, there's a parallelism in terms of the structure that is happening. So the first ayah will correspond with the last ayah, in this case the 7th. 2 will go with 6, 3 with 5, and then 5 is kind of the middle point, the crux, the central main message. If you wanted to get a summary of what that verse is talking about, or what that chapter is talking about, go to the middle. And from that ring forms an understanding of, this is kind of like the mirror, that 4 is the mirror. And then from that point, the 3 and 5, the messages delivered in verse 3 and verse 5 are either synonymous, they're either in conversation with one another, or they're in conversation with one another in terms of being opposing forces, but not opposing in the sense of opposite, more so just mirror images in terms of perhaps not an absence thereof, but more of it's a mirror image, if that makes sense. So to kind of see also on the point of Surah Al-Dhariyat, Surah 51 specifically in the verse, and we created pairs of all things, so perhaps you would be mindful. I'm not going to do that think, pair, share, but I'll just go around. What might the Quran suggest by stating pairs? In what terms does pairs mean? What do you guys think? Pairs as in like.
Traditional sense was that, creation.
Okay, right.
Dipoles, electron having two poles, and matter having two poles.
Like in a material sense.
That was the way I understood the world.
Same.
I usually think of it on that.
Okay. Good. Yeah, definitely. I come across that same kind of interpretation because it's like face value. Like that's literally like things have been created in pairs. Upon further reflection, or maybe just what I'm seeing in it, what does one could kind of, further reflection based on the research right here, just this point right here. Does this pairing kind of bring to thought the idea of how things can work in pairs in the sense of a pairing of immaterial things, non-tangible kind of, pairing of, happiness, sadness, or happiness, anger, or then even you get to minute, specific, like what is bittersweet? What is the opposite of bittersweet? Bittersweet is already like pears, so is there a pair to bittersweet? And then the pair of that bittersweet, is there perhaps a pairing to that bittersweet? So you just go down the line of not complexity, but just kind of getting to the ring of the tree. If we think of it in that kind of metaphorical sense, to the core root of what it could mean. And then I think this is kind of like a 2-3 part series, so I want to kind of get more into thematically what's going on, structurally what's going on more, aside from the ring theory, more with stuff from like my background of what I'm strongly focused in. So structure, general like parallelism through the logic being carried out in the verses. So especially between 2 and 6, there's a very like clear cut, you know, no pun intended, but piling up terms of like everything is added on in terms of like to speak to the nature of the surah itself in a way, but it does so in a logically complete way. And then the thematic kind of excavation of yaqeen or certainty, and then the 3 stages of that, and then how that is being discussed in the surah. But that will be next week, inshallah, or the next time I'm up here, and that's all I got. Thank you. True.
Thank you so much, Brother Sheikh. May Allah bless you. That was a very nice analysis, and inshallah, we'll like to hear more about several of those parts of the surah, inshallah, especially from a literary standpoint. So next we'll have Dr. Ja'far to discuss Tawheed. We're gonna skip the Sahaba part, unfortunately, just because we're so late, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. We'll talk about Abdullah ibn Rawaha next week, radiallahu anhu. It's a very nice story. They all have nice stories, mashallah. But anyway, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Remember not to put it in your
Oh, okay. Oh, I see.
You should put it just the slide instead of you know what I mean? Like, yeah, clip. That's the word.
Oh, like this?
Yeah. Still. You can only use both words or
Yes.
both words, you think, or you can use,
I think what I will do, if it's okay, I'll probably just erase this one. I think this one it already has a lot of the information we were going to use. So perhaps maybe we just switch them. What do you think? Should we just switch them? Ahsant. Thanks. So before we get started, I just want to point out one thing about what Brother Shaq was saying. So the word takathur, it comes from the Arabic word kathura, right? Kathura means to be basically multitudinous or to be a lot, right? That's where you get the Arabic word kathir, right? Kathir means a lot, right? Or kawthar. Kawthar comes from that same root, right? So takathur is basically it's a type of modified what we call verbal noun, right, in Arabic. So kathura is kind of the way Arabic works is every word is kind of derived from a trilateral root system. So kathura is the 3-letter root, right? Then from that you get these forms, these verbal forms that are kind of like, you can think of them almost like prefixes, suffixes you add on to words that make them into a sort of a verbal noun or a gerund, right? So specifically, so takathur, it has the sense, basically you're adding prefixes and suffixes to the word in a sense, and it forms, specifically it's this form tafa'ul, that specific pattern, right? So kathura takathur, fa'ala tafa'ul, right? There's like a certain verbal pattern, right, that's followed. So takathur means it has the sense of competition, like Brother Shaq was saying, but it also has the sense of accumulating, striving to accumulate for yourself abundance, right? So trying to get kathir for yourself, right? So it has that sense of that sort of reflexive meaning of trying to gather a lot for yourself, but it also has the sense in that way of competing with others. Everybody's trying to gather more for themselves, right? So you'll see a lot of people translate it as abundance diverts you, or that they'll translate this word takathur as abundance, but like Brother Shaq was saying, it carries that sense of competition, of trying to strive to keep getting more and more and more, right? Strive amongst other people, but then also for yourself, constantly trying to get more and more and more for yourself too. Not necessarily even focusing on others, but even just in a personal, reflexive way, right? So, but I thought your analysis was beautiful, mashallah. Ahsantum. So, okay, so we're going to talk about, we'll try to keep this short because I know it's getting late. Maybe what, like 10 minutes? Okay, inshallah. So, all right, so we were talking about, um, you guys remember we were talking about, I think it's complex, so that's why we keep reiterating every single week. We keep talking about this. But remember, we were talking about the necessary existent. We talked about the argument from contingency for why we believe in God, right? And remember, all of these lessons are derived from Sheikh Misbah Yazdi's book called Amuzishe Aqaid in Persian. It's also known in English as Theological Instructions, and you'll find it on alislam.org, right? So in this book, he basically covers the core theology that we should understand as Muslims, right? And we were talking about necessary existent, this concept of contingency, and how it's one of the strongest proofs for God's existence. Can someone summarize for me what we discussed in terms of the argument from contingency for why God exists? Bilal?
It was everything is put into motion by someone that isn't like the unmoved mover.
Okay.
I keep bringing it up, but
Yeah.
and,
No, that's a great way to. Yeah.
that somebody has to flip the switch into on position.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would stay on. It would stay in the on position forever.
Right.
So for this universe to be created, somebody had to put it into action.
Yes. So remember, we talked about this concept. It's called, this argument is known in Arabic as Burhanul Imkan, right? Burhanul Imkan is this concept of contingency. So contingency is probably the best translation, but Imkan also means possibility, right? So what it says is the argument goes like this: that every existent thing that we have, right? Everything you can actually even conceive of is one of three possibilities. Either it's impossible, like for instance, a square circle, it can't exist, right? Second possibility is that it's possible, it could exist or it might not exist depending on the circumstances, right? So it's mumkin is what we call it, right? So all of our existences, they're all mumkin, right? Because it's possible we would exist or it's possible we would not exist depending on the circumstances. If, for instance, this earth didn't exist, we wouldn't exist, right? Because we need this earth to survive. If the sun was one, let's say a couple inches closer to the earth, this earth would burn up and we wouldn't exist, right? So all these things are contingencies. They're all requirements in order for us to exist on this planet, right? So that's why we call our existence mumkin, because it requires a whole bunch of circumstances to all come together in the perfect storm for us to come to be, right? Now, everything in the universe is like this, if you think about it, right? Everything down to the solar system, down to the the Milky Way, everything in this whole universe requires certain circumstances in order for it to substantiate, right? Every material thing needs space, matter, and time, right? It needs these three basic requirements in order to be, right? So the whole idea is, well, let's say, okay, so the possibility is, okay, everything in this universe, everything in existence, all existent things are mumkin. They're all possible, right? There's nothing that actually is able to be without any circumstances, without any requirements of contingencies, right? Um, if that were the case, then nothing would come to exist, right? Because it's like basically everything is waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. If the right circumstances don't emerge, that thing would never come to be. It's like a whole bunch of people standing on a start line, since we're in the Olympic season and such, right? You can think everybody's about to run a 100-meter race, and every person on that start line, every competitor says, "I'm not going to run until the next guy starts, until the next guy starts, until the next guy starts." If everybody said that, nobody would ever start. The race would never move forward. There has to be an unmoved mover, right? Like Brother Bilal said, has to be someone who doesn't require any circumstances, who just, starts running, right? And then everybody else will start running, right? So this is what we call the necessary existent, what we call wajib. wajib al-wujud, right? The necessary existence is an entity that does not require any circumstances to be. It's independent of any contingency, right? And if we did not have that, this whole universe would not come to be, because if everything were contingent, nothing. It's like a whole bunch of, like we said, a whole bunch of competitors standing at a 100-meter race line, and none of them will move forward because every single one says, "I'm not going to go until he goes." Right? Somebody's got to initiate that cycle, right? So does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so this is the best argument for why God exists, and we talked about this, and this is what we call the necessary existence. So the necessary existent is Allah, right? Because He has to be independent of all circumstances, independent of all situations or contingencies. He doesn't require any contingencies to be, and He is the initiator of the whole universe, right? So we said okay, so atheists will come and say, okay, fine, necessary existent. Why can't this be matter? What's your guys' answer to that? Why can't the necessary existent be matter? What do you think, Bilal?
Like how you mentioned, space, time, and matter.
Yeah.
They're kind of interdependent onto each other.
Yes.
So for one to not exist, then the other would cease to exist as well.
So matter depends, it's contingent upon space and time, right? So automatically it's excluded from being the necessary existent. So that's a very important thing to understand, right? So the necessary existent cannot be material because material is dependent on circumstances, right? So that's very clear. Hopefully that's clear to you guys. If you have questions about that, we can explore that some more. Does that point clear to everyone? That materialism cannot be the first cause. It cannot be the necessary existent. Because if material was the necessary existent, it really is, by its very nature, material requires circumstances, it requires contingencies in order for it to come to be, right? It just by the fact that it's intimately tied with space and time, right? You cannot separate those concepts. In the Einstein's theory of relativity, he proved that all three of these are codependent upon each other. So that automatically excludes space, time, matter from being the necessary existent. So, okay, so some people will say, okay, well, this is a far cry from this Abrahamic God you guys believe in. You believe in a necessary existent, okay, immaterial. Well, how do we know he's a sentient being? How do we know he's omniscient, omnipotent, merciful, wrathful, all these traits that you give him? Where's that coming from? You just have this simple concept of the necessary existent. Where do you get the rest of it, right? So we started talking about how this is just the first step. Then Sheikh Misbah takes you through a whole basically line of argument that proves that this necessary existent must have other traits, must have other traits that are what we call positive and negative. And we talked about some of the negative traits last week. Do you guys remember? They're listed here, but can somebody run through them with me? Non-temporal. What did we say? What was? How did we derive that? That the necessary existent must be independent of time. Where does that come from?
Connect that space-time connection that if he is temporal, then he has to be
He's dependent on something, right?
dependent on
He
something.
becomes contingent upon time. So he's got to be non-temporal, right?
So he can't
Outside
have
of
attributes that are contingent.
Yes, he cannot have attributes of that would render him contingent, right? So non-temporal, non-dimensional, he doesn't exist in dimensions because then he's subservient to dimension, right? He's subservient, his existence is contingent upon space, a space in which he can occupy, right? So he's non-dimensional.
Space encompasses him, which would then take
Yes, space encompasses him. You can say that as well, but in the sense that he becomes dependent upon that space to carry him, right? So he's non-dimensional. He's non-physical. Why is he non-physical? Because he's non-temporal. Again, that ties into he's not dependent upon matter, right? And we also said one other thing was very important with the non-physical, non-complex, right? So how do we prove that God cannot be complex? Do you guys remember?
Complexity means that it can be broken down.
Yes. Okay, and why is that a problem?
Reduction means that there's a simpler, better form of it.
Okay.
If you have like complex, if you want something simple or complex. Everyone's gonna tell you, oh, it's simple, but the reasoning behind that, I would assume, is that um, it's not the best. I don't know. That's the only thing I can. It's not the
Okay.
best.
All right. I like the way you're thinking, Brother Ahmed. Yes, that is the answer. Ahsant. So it becomes interdependencies, right? Within this complex entity. Now each part, and you can subtract one part away. You can say, okay, now he's contingent upon all his parts being there. So if I take away one part, he's no longer God. He's no longer the necessary existent, right? So that contradicts the very nature of the necessary existent. Necessary existent has no contingencies. So if he has parts, then those parts become contingent upon each other, right? So that negates completely the concept of God being complex, right? So very much on that same line is the concept of singularity, right? So how do we prove? So some people, they'll say, sorry, my handwriting is terrible, but singularity. So how do we prove this? So people will say, okay, how do you prove God is one, right?
Yeah, I always just wondered the difference between singularity and unity.
Yeah,
I guess unity kind of refers to complex pieces that are coming together, where singularity it's on its own without others.
yeah. So you could say that. So in at least from the Quranic, or from, we'll say, from the lens of the Ahlul Bayt, right? They've taught us that Allah is like he is one, but not in the numerical sense, right? But he's one without a second. Like there's no other, right? There's just one, right? But there's also the sense of one in singularity. When we say singularity, we mean in the sense that there's no complexity within him, right? He is just one one through and through. There's no way you can divide him, right? So those are two different concepts of Tawheed, but they both apply to Allah, right? But this Tawheed al-Adad, that Allah is one and there's two and there's three, that is a wrong conception of Allah, right? Because there's no possibility of any second or third or fourth, right? Um, there's absolutely, it cannot be, right? And we're going to explain why, because of this concept of singularity. So let me try to just postulate something. I think that this will become much more clear, hopefully. So let's say, I don't know if I can bring this back. Okay, yeah. So let's say you had two necessary existence, okay? Okay, this is necessary existent 1, right? We'll say NE1 and NE2, okay? All right. You guys get this? So necessary existent 1, necessary existent 2. So if we say that there's two gods, right? There's two gods here, God 1 and God 2. There's going to be an area where they share traits, right? This kind of, if you think of it like a Venn diagram, this area in the middle where these are shared traits, right? Okay. And then these are traits that make them independent of each other. Independent traits, right? So they have shared traits and independent traits, right? Does that make sense? Do you guys see what I'm saying here? Right? Traits that separate, make them individualistic, make them their own separate gods. And then there's traits that they share, right? So for instance, being a necessary existent, they share those traits, right? But then there's traits that make them separate, right? So now what ends up happening, so there's a lot of absurdities actually in even proposing this. But I want to just make it very clear to you that we get to the same problem of complexity, right? Because what happens is, for each one of these gods, you can now divide this god. You can say there's a portion of this god that's independent and a portion that is shared with the other god, right? So now there's an interdependency between these two parts. You can say, hey, I can subtract out those shared traits, sort of subtract out these shared traits, and I'm left with this portion now of just independent traits. So now this God is dependent. There's a way I can divide him. There's a way I can separate, one side of him, one part of his attributes from the other, right? And so that creates interdependency. It creates that same problem that we talked about, that God cannot be complex, right? Do you guys understand that? So this is, yes.
Aspect of the divine that is shared between the God, Father, and Son.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to get to that because that all of this kind of naturally progresses, all these points that I'm making about the negative attributes of God, and that's one of them. This idea of what they call hulul. Hulul means like, or ittihad, that God becomes one with something, right? That idea is just preposterous. It makes no sense, right? Because if God became one with something, now you're proposing that basically God has subsumed or limited himself in another being, right? And then you get also this concept of, okay, there's a portion of God that is independent beyond, and then a portion that has come inside you. So you get that sort of division, right? The same issue where you get shared traits that are shared, traits that are independent, and now you have interdependency between those two, and that creates a complex God, which we said is impossible, right? Because a complex God automatically implies interdependency, it implies contingency. And so he cannot be necessary existent anymore, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So this is how you prove Tawheed from the necessary existent, right? This concept of necessary. Let me see. How much more time do we have? Do we have a lot? Okay. No, that's okay. This is hopefully important. So I'm trying to take my time to explain it. Okay. The other thing we said fusion or incarnation, right? Fusion or incarnation, and I was Brother Shire, just actually jumped the gun and got to that point already. But fusion or incarnation, like we said, is impossible because if God fuses or he embodies himself, becomes incarnate into Jesus, astaghfirullah, right? If that were the case, then there's a portion of him that's incarnated into Jesus and a part that is separate, God the Father. So you're creating divisions within God, and now there's interdependency that is created, right? You can propose, what if I take out Father the Son? What if I take out God the Father from God the Son? If I separated these two, is he still God, right? If I take out the Holy Ghost, is he still God, right? You could propose all these sort of hypotheticals, right? And we said Allah is such that there is no way you can separate any portion. God is completely a singular, perfect, simple being, not creation, astaghfirullah, but simple being, right? Simple entity without any parts, right? So some people ask us, okay, what about these 99 names we believe in, right? What if I took out Allah's Ar-Rahman, and left the other names? Would he still be God, right? What do you guys answer to that?
Sorry, go. Oh, I'd say would be because those are just like human additions, human attributes put onto something greater.
Okay, that's
What we kind of like put terms on.
yes, you are exactly right. So this idea of 99 names, it's just human conceptions. Those names, they're compartmentalizations for us to understand, right?
The word isim means symbol rather than
Yes, it
like an actual definition of what that thing is.
yeah.
Like
How you know something
yeah,
versus defined with
yeah,
encompassing
encompassing or defining something. It's like a symbol of it.
Yeah. So, so if you say that Allah in his totality is defined by these 99 attributes, you've limited God, right? God that man wasafahu faqad hadda. This is a line from Nahj al-Balagha, that someone who describes God or tries to give him a sifa, give him a description, he has actually limited him, right? So these are our own limited understandings of God, where we come up with these 99 names, but
And it can't be
these are compartmentalizations. The actual divine essence is singular and there's no divisions, there's no separations, but it's not possible for a human being to understand that. All that God is all of these things. He's Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, As-Salam, all these things in one, without any divisions, without any compartmentalizations. It's not easy for us to conceptualize that. So we come up with these names to understand it. But you have to understand that this is a human conception, right? And so do not confuse that with Allah, right? Allah is beyond all divisions, all particularizations, all compartmentalizations. Yes?
Brother online had a question saying, how is 99 names now bid'ah? If it's human creation, that wasn't a thing back then.
So 99 names, these are names that Allah has introduced himself through in the Quran. He said he is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. He said that he's Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, As-Salam, Al-Mu'min, Al-Muhaymin. He said all these names about himself in the Quran, right? So he has used these names for the human beings to understand, because absolute perfection that is impeccable, that is beyond human comprehension, right? Um, it's so transcendent, it's so beyond. If Allah wanted to just leave us, without any type of understanding of Him, He could have done that. But out of His mercy, He tried to give us some understanding within our own human language of what He is, of how superior He is, right? But these do not limit God. Don't ever imagine that Allah is these things and that's it. He is much more sublime than any of this. That's why we say Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar min an yusaf. Allah is greater than can ever be described, right? Because He doesn't fall into these human characterizations, these human compartmentalizations, right?
Is it Allah limiting himself by providing his relief?
No, not at all.
Last week is a very nice metaphor where if you're trying to explain an elephant to a child, like how would you describe an elephant to a child?
Yeah.
You would go, oh, he's got like two optic nerves, and his rostrum is like this, and his embryo was like this. You wouldn't describe to the child this kind of language. You actually use much simpler language, things that would pertain to the child's intellect. It's a very similar, I think, metaphor, but of course, to the infinite level. But
Yes.
I think that was a very nice. I'm not sure if that you are. I'm not sure if it's, but it was a very nice metaphor for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good way to understand things, but we have to understand that also these are human descriptions of what is beyond a human's understanding in the first place, right? That's why we say subhanallah. That's why there's so much focus in the Quran on what we call tanzih. Tanzih means basically professing the transcendence of God, right? Professing that God is beyond anything we can imagine, right? Professing that God is super sublime, right? He is beyond anything we can comprehend. All of that focus in the Quran, you'll see that constantly. Subhanallahi amma yushrikun. You'll see this constantly being mentioned, right? What is it? وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا Subhana. You'll see this constantly mentioned in the Quran. Subhana, subhana. What does subhan mean? Subhan means may God be beyond anything that you can, any type of deficiency or imperfection. God is beyond that. He floats above that, basically, right? Sabaha has that meaning of floating, right? Subhan means God is beyond. He floats above all of that, right? All imperfections. So in essence, right, that's one of the very core messages of Islam. You get that in the statement Allahu Akbar and in Subhanallah. Both of these are ways of doing tanzih of Allah, saying that He is beyond anything that we can imagine, right? So, but that these names, they exist in a sense of us being able to at least get a glimmer of an understanding of who Allah is, But of course, that's why in the Quran, one of the other very beautiful things you'll see, like the end of Surah Hashr, Allah has this, right? هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور, right? What is it? الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر, right? Subhanallah amma yushrikun. So it says all these names of Allah, and then at the end it says Subhanallah, right? Why is it doing that? What do you guys think is the significance there?
Because he's giving us names or attributes that are beautiful and already magnificent on their own. And then it's like, okay, you can imagine, the most magnificent thing, but Allah's beyond all these things.
So, ahsant. It's very beautiful. So it's actually such a powerful verse, right? Right. When you read this verse, like for an Arab at that time, when he read this verse, it almost blew his mind, right? You know why? Because in Arabic, when you do this, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, As-Salam, Al-Mu'min, you're saying he's all of these. You're saying these are each attributes of Allah, and you're not saying huwa al-Khaliq wal-Bari' wal-Musawwir. You're saying al-Khaliq wal-Bari' wal-Musawwir, right? You're saying like he's like this and this and this and this and this and this, like all these perfections. You're saying Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, As-Salam, Al-Mu'min, Al-Muhaymin, Al-Aziz, and then at the very end, Allah's like Subhanallah amma yushrik. He's like beyond anything you can imagine, right? So it's like Allah's like He's taking it. He's like basically every name is amplifying the perfection of God within the human mind, right? And then at the very end, it's like He's going to explode your mind. He's beyond anything you can imagine, right? So that's kind of the significance of that verse. That verse is extremely, very, very powerful. In fact, there are hadith that say that these last verses of Surah Hashr, they have Allah's Ismul A'zam in it. They have Allah's greatest name, because that's what these verses kind of, they take you through this almost this trajectory. You're going through each name of Allah and understanding, wow, he's this and this and this and this and this and this, and then at the very end, subhanallah amma yushrikun, beyond anything you can imagine, right? So, so I hope that makes sense. Kind of, we kind of went on a tangent, but hopefully,
Would it be fair to say that Allah is kind of teaching us that He's the source of these attributes that we are aware of, like al-alim? We know what ilm is.
yes,
Somebody can be alim, but then he's the extreme of that he's alim.
yes,
The source of all knowledge.
ahsant.
The neo-Platonic understanding of other attributes that Brother talks about, doesn't it emanate from Allah?
Kind of. He's not separated from these attributes, and their attributes are not separated from each other, and that he's the source of all those.
Yes, yes, that is a correct way of understanding. Allah's ontological perfection, basically par excellence, right? And all of us, we're basically emanations. Allah, manifests His attributes through His creation, right? But Allah is the ontological perfection, right? So, and all existential perfection goes back to God, right? All existential virtue goes back to God, right? Yes, alhamdulillah, that's one of the meanings of it, So, I don't know if we have much time left. I think maybe we might just stop here. But what do you guys think? Does this make is this?
I'd like to ponder upon two questions for next week, inshallah. One is, you're describing, being in a creation or going into something as a divine being. The Quran does talk about tajalli al-jabal.
Right.
People ask Musa, some of the people who like to ask him, can you show us Allah? And Allah said, Musa was like, fine, I'll ask Allah, hey, can you show me yourself? And he said, all right, you'll never see me, but watch this mountain. And then the Quran says, Tajalla al-Jabal. That's an interesting description. I'd like to get the philosophical meaning behind that. What does that mean? God sat on the mountain? God go inside the mountain? Is that something parts? Because Allah talks about that in the Quran.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I wanted to ask about is
Okay, so let's explore some of the points you made. Oh yes, okay, inshallah. Of course, of course. I'll just leave you with one thing on this verse. So this verse is very interesting. The verse you brought up, I think it's in Surah Al-A'raf. Where Allah is talking about this specific incident, right? When Prophet Musa asks Allah, let me look at you, right? And Allah says, you will never see me, right? But rather look at this mountain, and if it stays in its place, then you will surely see me then. And then Allah manifests to that mountain, right? And it completely shatters and crumbles, right? And Prophet Musa faints, right? So this story, right? Yes. So this whole story, there are people who use this exact story to say that Allah on the Day of Judgment, He will be. You can see Him. You can see Allah, right? And they use this exact verse because they say, how could Prophet Musa, he's a prophet of Allah, how could he ask for something that he knows is impossible? Why would he ask, Rabbi arini anzur ilayk? Why would he say, oh Allah, let me see you, manifest yourself towards me, like let me see you? If he's a prophet of Allah, like astaghfirullah, is he so jahil that he doesn't know like that Allah is not physical? How could he ask Allah this, right? So they say that the mere fact that Prophet Musa asked him means that in the hereafter he will be seen. He will be seen with the naked eye. But in this world, he was asking Allah to show him himself, right? And so I want you guys to think about that. Try to understand. This is the argument. They say, is Prophet Musa so jahil that he would ask Allah, when you guys, you Shia, you say that Allah cannot be seen, He's not physical. Well, why is Prophet Musa asking him to that, oh Allah, show me yourself? If he's a prophet of Allah, shouldn't he know that, right? So this is the argument that some of the Ahlul Sunnah they present to us, and I want you guys to think about that, and we'll talk about it next week. How do you dismantle that argument? Yeah. So tajalli, we'll talk about the meaning of that too. There's a verse in the Quran, وَلَوْلَا أَن كَتَبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْجَلَاء. That verse uses that same word, jala, right? Yeah, in Surah Al-Hashr, right? So jala, tajalli comes from the word jala, right? And we'll talk about the details there, inshallah. Yes.
Another thing, in terms of things going inside things. Allah says, I blew, literal meaning of the verse, I blew into him, into God, or Maryam from ruhi, or min ruhi, from my soul, or from my ruh, or my
Right.
soul, I guess, or our soul.
Right.
The literal meaning, but we'll probably cover this more inshallah next week.
Yes, inshallah.
These are verses of the Quran. Like, hold on a second. If a Christian comes up to you and anyone that has these, manifestation beliefs, that says, oh, God goes into things. They'll tell you, listen, God's going into things. What are you talking about? God has parts. Quran tells these things. Why are you arguing against that?
Yes, of course. These are all excellent questions, and inshallah, I hope this was useful though. Maybe inshallah was this the topic of Tawheed is a very complex topic, and it requires even just this one. I mean, we spent so much time on this, and there's still so much to cover because it's a very deep topic, But you guys are asking really good questions. Yes, Brother Muhammad.
So the brother said that how we say, oh, if Allah is all merciful, then why does it matter what God we believe in? If Allah is most merciful, then the belief of God, like you said, the complex that Hindus believe in, and non-complex like we Muslims believe in. Why does that matter?
Because their belief is nonsensical, right? Because your aqidah, your basis of belief has to be strong. It has to be based on logic. Everything that we've said here is logical. God has to be non-complex. If he were complex, then he fails to be the necessary existent. He now becomes a contingent being, right? So all of these beliefs, they're all logical. This is what I was telling you guys about Islam. Islam is the theology is extremely logical and it's extremely consistent. There's no deficiencies in our, basically because we get our knowledge from the Ahlul Bayt, right? The way that the type of understanding the theology that the Ahlul Bayt have given us, it's unparalleled. You won't find any other faith tradition that has the same rigor in terms of understanding theology, right?
Find us a school religious group that says you believe you have to come to understand our core principles without traditional knowledge, but through intellectual endeavor.
Right.
There's nothing. Doesn't exist.
Yeah. Ahsantum.
Only
Ahsantum.
I wonder if the question that is actually being asked is consequentially in the day of judgment or whatever happens after that. Why does it matter? If God's all merciful, the Hindu or the atheist, whatever they believe,
Yeah.
if He's all merciful, then it doesn't matter, right? Whatever these people do, whatever they believe, it shouldn't matter if He's all merciful. So I think it's good. It's a good question.
Oh, okay. I see what you're. So.
It doesn't matter to these people.
So.
God's all merciful, all forgiving, all
Yeah, so some people they say like God is so magnanimous, he's so beyond anything, he's so excellent, so sublime. What does he care about like a mouse who believes in him or doesn't believe in him or like what does it matter, right? So some people they use this argument. What the best response to say though is that God is so caring about every one of his creatures, right? He's so infinitely caring that he actually does want you to reach that perfection of understanding him. Understand, or maybe not fully understanding him, but gaining higher levels of understanding of him. That ma'rifah of your Lord is what ascends you ontologically to higher pedestals.
What does it matter? They can do good deeds.
Yeah.
It's not all that matters in practicality, just doing good deeds.
No, it's not because the deeds themselves, deeds are important, but what separates one prophet from another prophet in terms of rank, in terms of station? Many of us, I mean, we believe the prophets were infallible, right? They didn't, they didn't, it was a ma'rifah, yes. It was the level of understanding of Allah, right? That is what raises you in rank. And it makes you more and more connected because God is our source. So the more we understand God, the higher our level is, or the higher level of ontological perfection that we have, right? So a Hindu who has, basically beliefs in fusion and incarnation and reincarnation, all these crazy beliefs that make no sense. Sure, but that from the level of the haqiqah, the actual truth, they're very, very distant from it, right? So that Allah wants His creatures to raise themselves to the higher levels of understanding. And He's so merciful, He cares so much about us that He wants us to keep ascending. He wants us to get closer to Him. In terms of whether Allah will punish them on the Day of Judgment, if they were qasir, right? If they just fell short, perhaps Allah will show them mercy. This is beyond our understanding, right? We cannot be the judges of everyone. But we know that Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu alaykum anfusakum. Focus on yourselves, Don't keep thinking, oh, what about this Hindu friend of mine? What about this? Like, who knows? Who knows what Allah is going to do? Yeah, innamal a'malu bi khawatimiha. There's a hadith, that the deeds are by their endings, right? So, a Hindu today might be, but maybe by the end of his life, he'll realize many things. Maybe he'll be beyond you in terms of his understanding.
Maybe it's the original Hindu, from the actual the text was actually was Unitarian or actually monotheist.
Yeah.
He actually has beliefs that are.
I think it's really important for us not to fall into this judgmental mentality. Don't criticize people, but criticize ideas. Criticize ideas, and also focus on elevating your own understanding, your own recognition, your own level of comprehension of who Allah is, your ma'rifah, right? On your own personal level. Don't worry about what other people are doing.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that this lesson is reliant on the previous lesson, and I think some of the most important previous lessons that we went through was like in regards to epistemology, where do we get our knowledge from and information from, and what sources of knowledge are shared among humans that we are supposed to rely on for understanding the world around us, where logic reasoning is the basis in which we communicate, and it's the thing that we should rely on when we are establishing facts or truths about our knowledge about the world.
Exactly. Ahsantum. Ahsantum. All right. You guys are good? Any other questions? Good?
Inshallah, we'll have this for next week. Inshallah. The question is, what's more important than belief? How God? What's more important? The belief in how God is, or the akhlaq and the kindness of the person. And I think it's a similar question to the question I was asked before. Are the actions, or the pure heart actions, are what's important, or is it, the ma'rifat of Allah?
There's a hadith, تخلقوا بأخلاق الله, right? So if you actually, how do you gain good akhlaq? It's by understanding Allah, right?
You actually answered this maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's like, okay, what is good then in the end? Because
Yeah.
the problem then becomes you have to define good. If you have false idols, if you have things that aren't the truth, then you will define good as whatever you want it to be. It will start changing depending on how the idols start changing. I think that's one of the big principles against polytheism, is because polytheism is not truth. And you start making up stuff.
Yeah.
You start making up what stuff is, and your role models, and then their good was,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're not doing the true good anymore.
Right. But to have good etiquette, other very, very, mashallah, ahsant on your point, but the other very key point to remember is that learning good etiquettes depends on how much ma'rifah, the level of your etiquette will be in proportion to how much your recognition is of Allah, right? So that's why, look at Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein, Dua Arafah, if you read Dua Arafah, you see the level of ma'rifah that Imam Hussein had. That's why he was able to, completely be beyond anything, transcend any type of human boundaries, average human boundaries in terms of his closeness to Allah, despite all the tribulation he had, right? And you see the same people who claim that they're Muslims, right? Who claim that they believe in the Holy Prophet and that they have also belief in Allah. They believe in Tawheed, but how low their understanding is, how low their ma'rifah of Allah was. Where did it lead them, right? Yeah. Some of them were. Yeah. Yes. So that doesn't mean it's actually your ma'rifah is something deeper than just the ritualistic aspects of religion, right? And so I think that's something really important that we have to remember.
Yeah.